The old clock over the radio stopped ticking for a full minute when he spoke. A prisoner named Harold Howe, Mercer sat at a small table under a dull light. His hands were thick and steady. He had been quiet for years, like a pond frozen in winter. Reporters and families packed a small room in the prison's visiting wing. Some people held tissues. Some people held folders with faded photos inside. The town listened on the radio and watched on small TV screens. Howe cleared his throat and said 3 words that made the room shake. I saw them. That is all he said at first. I saw them. But then he told more. He told the name of a lonely road where a car had stopped long ago. He said the name of the store where a strange man worked, and the sound of a dog that barked before the night went quiet. He said the color of a coat he had seen in the dark. He spoke slowly, and every word felt heavy like a stone dropped into deep water. The town had waited for decades. People had dreamt about that night and woken up with the same cold feeling. A young woman named Lila Owens had disappeared 27 years ago. Her picture had been on milk cartons, on church boards, and on the local paper. The police had looked and asked and searched, but the trail had grown thin. Years passed. The town grew older. Lila's mother, Mary, kept a light by the window, as if light could pull a lost person back home. When Hal Mercer started to speak, he did not say he wanted fame. He did not say he wanted money. He said his bones hurt and his time was short, and something in him wanted to stop people's pain. He said he could not keep the secret in his chest any longer. The room leaned forward. The guard shut the door. The air smelled like old paint and copying paper. Hal's voice did not break. He told a story that smelled of dirt and rain and small things. He told how he had been a young man that night, how he had driven a truck for a living, and how he had seen a car on the side of the road, thinking it was someone with a flat tire. He said he had stopped and seen shadows by the ditch. He saw someone carry something wrapped in a blanket to the trunk. He saw the back seat light blink and a face for a second. Lila's face and photo he had once seen at the diner. He remembered the shape of the hair and the way the moon made it silver. People in the room began to cry and whisper. Some could not believe a man in prison would suddenly bring back a light from so long ago. Others thought it could be a lie, a game, or a way to get out of his cell for a night. But Hal was firm. He said that after the truck left, he drove to a diner and ate the same pie he always ate, and that the next week he had dreamed a green scarf and woke up with his palms wet. He had held the memory in his head for years. He was tired of holding it. Before Hal told his story, the case was a rumor that moved like wind. It was a thing people whispered when the power went out. Mothers told their children to stay close at night because of that thing that happened long ago. The detectives had tried to find Lila. They had turned over every stone they could find. They had questioned neighbors, followed bad phone leads, and waited for someone to remember something new. They had found a broken shoe track and a torn map, and once a wallet with coins and a name tag that was not Lila's. But the trail had gone cold like morning coffee left outside. When Hal named the road Hawthorne Lane, detectives felt a small, sharp excitement. That road was a long dirt path that curved by a creek. People said there were old trees like watchmen. The police had driven that lane many times, but they had never found anything. That night, at Hal's words, they decided to drive it again. Before the telling, Hal had been a small rumor deep inside the prison. He had been behind another crime walls away from those questions. He had a record and a scar on his lip. The prison life had made him quiet. He mowed the yard, fed the chickens at the program farm, and wrote letters with shaky ink. People in the town had long believed the answer to Lila's case was gone. But some families, like Mary Owens, had not stopped looking. Mary sat in the back of that visiting room with her hands folded so tight the veins showed. When Hal spoke the name of the creek, tears moved down her face like tiny rivers. Before we go back to the days before Hal told, it is important to know the town. Juniper Falls was a small place with one traffic light and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon every morning. People knew each other's birthdays and who had borrowed sugar last winter. Juniper Falls liked to sleep with its windows open and its porch lights on. But after the night Lila disappeared, the windows in some homes stayed shut. Lila Owens was gentle. She worked at the library and liked to walk at dusk with a small brown dog named Buster. She smiled easily. She loved to stack books in neat little piles and tie ribbons around them for the children's program. On the night she vanished, she had been delivering a donated box of books to a friend down the lane. She never came back. Her bike was found leaning against a tree, with its bell still warm from rain. The town searched the woods and the fields and called her name. The sheriff at the time had followed ways that led nowhere. The case went to cold files, and every year, the town held an anniversary vigil with candles and soft songs. Detective Nina Ramos worked the case for many years. She had been a young detective when Lila went missing and had grown into gray at the temples, carrying the weight of that night. The case had been like a thorn in her shoe, small, sharp, and always there. Nina had stacks of papers, notes, and a box of old letters from people who had seen something or thought they had. She had asked Hal questions when he first came to prison for his own crime many years ago, but he had said nothing then. He had looked at the floor and mumbled, "Not my business." People like Hal sometimes keep their mouths shut out of fear, pride, or shame. When Hal first came into the prison yard, he kept to himself. He whistled low songs and did small acts of kindness. He would fix fences and collect trash, and he would talk to the chickens on the farm program like they were old friends. Guards liked him for that. He was harmless at first glance, but in his pockets he kept a knot of memory that made his nights full of dreams. The prison is a place of slow time, and memory is a sharp thing there. It does not fly away easily. Detective Ramos had a quiet way. She would bring a cup of black coffee and sit with the case as if she were sitting with a sleeping child. She had read Hal's file, and something about his handwriting made her think he had a detail she never found, but she could not prove it. She had watched Hal in the yard and watched him read dusty newspapers. She kept a picture of Lila on her desk with tape on the corners. People told her she was stubborn. She said she was simply not going to stop. In the years after Lila's disappearance, the town changed little. The library still had plush chairs. The bakery still had cinnamon. Children still played in the park. But every year, there were new fences and old fears. Mothers would warn their kids not to take certain paths. High school football games were full of loud cheering, but at halftime people talked about the old case and shook their heads. Lila's mother, Mary, never married again. She kept the spare room at the end of the hall the same. She left the radio on at night in the hope that someone would call with news. When Hal decided to speak, he did not go to the press first. He asked to talk with Detective Ramos. He asked for a paper and a pencil. He said the words had been heavy in his chest for too long. He wanted the town to know what he knew, so the families could have answers. Detective Ramos sat across from him and listened as if each word might be a tiny key. Hal told the truth in pieces. The road, the night, the sound of a dog. He told how he had been young and afraid, and how he had watched a man in a dark coat push a package into the trunk of a car. He said the man's laugh made him uneasy. He told how he had gone home and slept, but never told anyone because he thought the police would not care for someone like him. The first small step after Hal's words was to go to the lane with a shovel and to walk slowly with metal poles that could find metal in the earth. They brought a camera and gloves. People from the town watched from their cars with blankets around their knees. The detectives walked where Hal had said he saw the car. The creek whispered like a secret. The ground was soft from last week's rain. Detective Ramos felt a prickle like the hair on the back of her neck. She tapped her pole in the mud and listened. It did not take long. The metal pole struck something hard. The sound was small but clear, a note in a song. They dug. The dirt came away in clumps. At first it was only a small box, then an old tin, then a shoe. Detective Ramos felt her breath catch. A little farther down, wrapped in cloth, they found a small bundle that had been hidden for a long time. Inside was a thin shoe and a ribbon with a small scrap of Lila's favorite color, blue. The discovery made the town sigh and gasp at once. The sheriff called in for more help. For the first time in decades, there was something real to point at, a place, an object, a remnant that belonged to the girl whose picture had warmed the fridge doors in many homes. That was not the end. It was a beginning. It was a beginning of hope and of more questions. Who had buried it? Why had someone left it there? And how did someone in prison finally find the courage to say what he saw? For a few quiet days, the town buzzed with a soft, shaky joy and with fear that the truth might be harder than they hoped. People gathered at the diner and whispered. Some said Hal was a hero. Others said he had waited to tell to get attention. Mary Owens held the ribbon like it was a king's cloak. She cried and smiled and said thank you to the detectives who had not given up. Detective Ramos knew more work waited. The dirt had truths like knots. Pull one, and another would tighten. She had leads to follow and time to track. People gave statements that were fuzzy from so many years. Memories are like old film, scratched and grainy. But a new set of eyes could sometimes see what old eyes missed. The chapter closes on an extreme event that shook Juniper Falls awake like thunder. Late one night, after the tin had been found and after the town had started to whisper again, someone set fire to an old barn behind the creek near Hawthorne Lane. Flames lit the sky. Neighbors called the volunteer fire crew. Sirens painted the streets red. The barn had been empty for years, but people always parked there for small-town celebrations. The smoke rose and turned the moon orange. Mary Owens stood at her kitchen window and watched the smoke worry the stars. Detective Ramos stood on cold ground watching the flames and thought of Hal's words. The fire felt like a message, maybe a warning, maybe anger. The sheriff picked through the ash the next morning and found footprints that led away from the barn toward the lane. They were fresh and hard to see. Someone had been there under the cover of night. Someone did not want the past to be uncovered. The town felt the heat of the flames in its bones. Some people said the fire was a coincidence. Some said it was a threat. For Detective Ramos, it was a call to hurry. She tapped her pen against a map on her desk and said, "We will not let them burn the truth." We stop here. When you are ready, I will continue the story in Chapter 2.